Lesson 11, Young Earth and Dating Methods. So some of the difficulties of carbon-14 dating. First, there's varies according to changes in the cosmic ray flux, solar wind, solar magnetic field, solar flare, or due to the variations in the Earth's magnetic field. And occasionally there's spikes that may occur. For instance, carbon-14 can be reduced by lightning. Now, of the carbon that's available, 99% of it is carbon-12. Carbon-13 makes up 1%. That leaves carbon-14 as a very trace amount at 1 or 1.5 atoms per 10 to the 12 atoms of carbon. Now, 1 or 1.5 atoms per 10 with 12 zeros behind it of carbon. So it starts off as a very trace amount of carbon. So when we start talking about carbon-14, there's just things called half-life. In other words, of that trace amount, how long would it take for half of it to decay? And that's what we call the half-life. Half of that would be gone. And they're saying after 5,730 years. But now how do we come up with that? Come on. I mean, it's like you start off with a trace amount, and then you're going to watch it for, say, 10 years, and then you determine how much it decayed in that 10-year period. Then the only way to do that is you have to extrapolate back 5,730 years to say that that's the first half-life. It's all about extrapolation and a whole bunch of assumptions, but there's nobody that's stayed around for 5,730 years to see if it was actually a half-life. There's extrapolations and assumptions, and they got to make sure that they specify that. So let's just suppose, okay, so after one half of the substance has decayed away at 5,730 years, and that happens a half-life. So 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, 1/32, 1/64, 1/28, 1/256, and 1/512 at 51,570 years. In other words, after about 50,000 years, there's nothing left to be even examined. It's absurd to say that a rock or the universe or the Earth, anything beyond 50,000 years, it's absurd to use carbon-14 dating. When I asked a particular science teacher about how to get distance and years of how old this universe is, he came up with this thing called parallax, which I did some research on. Astronomers actually prefer the unit of parsec. So 1 parsec is approximately 3 light years. This all comes from the website that I've listed down below. The parallax method can therefore only be used for stars closer than 100 parsecs. In other words, about 300 light years. So 300 light years. So that doesn't get you a very old universe by using this method. Anything beyond that, again, if you come with your assumptions, it's just like the carbon-14, what's left of the accuracy is pretty much done after 50,000 years. We're here after about 300 years. The calculations just start to break down. So there's other things in this article that you can read about, and you go back to my physics class as far as it talking about brightness and color, and I go to refraction and the bending of light into the spectrum. I believe Newton had a better understanding of that than Einstein and some of these other people today, and that because of this refraction of the light around the solar systems and different objects, the suns and planets in the universe, throws that color as well as the dimness out of perspective, and it's hard to determine precisely what we're actually watching and seeing. So we have to be real careful with that. So you can go back to my physics class and look at that. I'm not going to go into real big detail, but you can look at this particular website if you want to get some more of that data. But always think about the assumptions and the extrapolation and all the unsure modifiers. There are many other methods that they use to try to get the age of the universe, but this is from this segment called The Age of the Universe by Wikipedia. If you go down to the place where it talks about the assumptions of strong priors. This is pretty good. I mean, it gets only a snippet though. The rest of it's, you got lost in all the dialogue as far as being so specific and exact and stuff. But when you get down to the assumptions, it says calculating the age of the universe is accurate only if the assumptions built into the models being used to estimate it are also accurate. And on down, this is not a valid procedure in all contexts. Based on the fact we have assumed the underlying model we used is correct. Accurate to the specified error, since this error represents the error in the instruments used to gather the raw data into the model. This area is very crucial that you understand this, that there's a lot of assumptions going on, that they don't use the word extrapolation in this little segment here, but just look for words as unsure phrases, unsure modifiers, such as extrapolation in particular. There's a lot of extrapolating, a lot of assumptions done in this. They make it sound like it's fact, but it is not fact. It's based upon a huge assumptions. Now, is there any evidence for young Earth? Well, there's a lot of information on the internet. The internet is awesome. Just do your own research. For instance, this is one from Answers in Genesis. It's called the 10 Best Evidences for Science That Confirm a Young Earth. Now, to be fair, look for the unsure modifiers and statements in this one as well. I want to be fair to everybody, but I want to give you both sides of this issue. And the purpose of my website in general is to give you alternative data compared to what's being taught. So this gives you some of that data that you may not be exposed to. One thing that Einstein used that I really like is a thought experiment. So this is a thought experiment. So just play along for a second. I have a table and I have a measuring rod, and I want to see how many measuring rods it takes to for the length of this table. Now I write a note that states that the measurement of the table is 7 rods long. I have two witnesses that see the table, the rod, and the note. They are a scientist and a theologian. We lock the table, rod, and the note in a vault with 2 armed guards. We each have a key that must be turned at the same time to unlock. The guards watch the vault 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in 8-hour shifts for 2 years. Two years later, the scientist, the theologian, and I open the vault. I read the note that states that the table is 7 rods long. I take the rod and I measure the table. It takes 14 rod lengths to measure the table. So it took twice as many rod lengths to measure the table. What are the possible explanations? The scientist states that the measuring rod does not change because that is why it is used to measure. Therefore, the scientist proclaims that the table doubled in size. That would result in the table being 14 rods long. The theologian then states that it is possible that the measuring rod shrunk in half and the table stayed the same. That would also result in the table being 14 rods long. The point is, the data is the same. That is the absolute truth. 2 years ago, the table was 7 rods long, and today it is 14 rods long. However, the interpretation of the data is relative. I sometimes wonder why Einstein was so famous, as this kind of ties into that thought experiment. First of all, the ether. At first he said as a young man that the ether did exist, but he couldn't get anywhere with academia and the peer review, if you will. So he changed his mind and said that it did not exist. Then he became more accepted by the academia and the peer review, and he became famous like a rock star. And but then after he became so popular, he became the authority. Then he could say whatever he wanted to say and what he really truly believed. After he did the general and special relativity, he said that the ether must exist. So that was part of it. So during that period of time when he became the rock star, he said it did not exist, and he also said the speed of light was fixed. It was the absolute. So those are the two things, that I have here in red that really made him popular. So if we look at Einstein as a scientist that believed that the measuring rod, the speed of light, is the absolute, then it would result in an expanding universe. However, is there someone that believes that the measuring rod, the speed of light, changed over time and the universe may be stagnant? Let me introduce you to Barry Setterfield. He said that the speed of light was infinite in the beginning and has been slowing down ever since. Do we have any proof of that scenario? I have stated in my physics class that everything in the universe slows down, wears out, gets colder due to entropy. So it seems logical that the speed of light would also be affected. Allow me to use some thoughts from my physics class. Remember that the density of matter is directly proportional to the intensity of energy. If in the beginning the physical matter and energy of the universe, primarily matter, fit into a singularity, it would then result in a very intense energy field known as the ether. I do a lot of these things in my head, so some of these things I'm not positive about, but it just seems logical to me in my mind, some of the things that I've read. So if you could help me in some of these areas and do some of your own thinking and research. But in my opinion, electricity flows through a hard or thick copper wire faster than a soft or thin copper wire. The propagation of light through space is made possible by the ether. Another way of stating this is that the ether is the conduit through which light flows. Being that the ether is more intense near the event, the singularity, and is less and less intense the further out to the edge, then it would seem that the propagation of light at the time of the Big Bang would have been much faster near the event and slowed down as the intensity of the ether became less. As the singularity expanded during the Big Bang, the energy field, the ether, would begin to shrink to stay in proportion. The energy field would become less intense. Therefore, over time, the ether field changes in intensity. If the ether field, the conduit, changes in intensity, then we are saying that the conduit changes. If the conduit changes, then the speed of light that passes through it will change accordingly. There will be a time when the physical matter and energy will be in equilibrium with the matter and energy of the invisible ether. This is the steady state. At this time, the ether field stops shrinking to correspond with the physical universe that stops expanding. At this time, the speed of light should be more consistent to a fixed speed. The conduit stops changing, then the speed of light stops changing. So Mr. Setterfield makes an interesting point. He believes that the speed of light was infinite in the beginning. I can state with assurance that it changed over time and therefore is not constant. Remembering Tesla, who stated the ether is all around us as potential energy, gives some credibility to light being infinite in speed. Taking my thought that light is not made of moving particles, but it is a chain reaction that makes it more plausible to have a faster speed for light due to the connectivity of the ether. The difference between me and some people is that I seek the truth while others just put forth the thoughts that support their position. Therefore, one thought that affects what I propose is that energy flows faster through cold than through hot. Now, in the beginning, there was an intense energy field near the singularity, which was also very hot. Remember that the denser matter becomes, the more heat energy is realized. Therefore, I cannot say with confidence what the speed of light was in the beginning compared to today. We have the dynamics of the intensity which would cause a light to be fast and the heat that would cause it to be slow. I can say with assurance that the speed of light is not constant because it changes over time due to the changing conduit, the ether, through which it traverses. Therefore, I believe that part of the reason that Einstein became so popular was because for a time he said that the ether did not exist and that the speed of light was fixed. That resulted in the hypothesis that the universe is old and expanding. I discussed in my physics class that Einstein was disappointed that he had declared that the thinking behind the cosmological constant. I believe he was right in his understanding that something had to be balancing the force of gravity. However, fixing the speed of light caused him to admit an expanding universe. All he had to do was change his thought to the cosmological variable. He would still be right that something counteracted gravity, but it changes. He would be right then because an expanding universe or a changing speed of light would both have fit his proposition. However, the academia and peer review of the day forced Einstein to state that there was no ether and the speed of light was fixed. This fit the narrative of an old Earth and a neo-Darwinian understanding of evolution. Towards the end, Einstein came to believe more in the Newtonian understanding of the necessity of the ether. This partially took away some of the strength of academia and peer review old Earth proponents. However, they are still winning because the damage was done. Most people do not realize that Einstein changed his position on the ether later in his life. I hold the Holy Scripture in high regard. I am more inclined to believe that God created as is in 6 days with the interpretation of the word yom, meaning one day, morning and evening. Actually, the earth may have been spinning faster in the beginning and slowed down some due to entropy. However, I believe that it refers to the earth day. So, with that being said, I believe the universe is younger than some old Earth scientists state that it is, but it is older than what some young Earth people believe. Anyone who is dogmatic on the specific age of the universe is either being deceptive or naive. I appreciate some people trying to find the answer. However, they must list the difficulties clearly with their assumptions. To present it as fact is not being truthful. In closing, one point I wish to make. Today it seems that academia, including peer reviews, has sided with the old earth neo-Darwinian thinking. Anyone with an opposing view is shunned or at least discredited. It seems that they used Einstein to promote their point of view with the understanding of the ether and the speed of light. Although he never changed his thinking on the speed of light, he did on the ether. Academia needed him to promote both because the speed of light is tied to the conduit, the ether. But Einstein changing his mind on the ether did not hurt their position because most people do not know that he changed his mind or the significance of his decision. Take advantage of the internet. There's a tremendous amount of information there. Here are just a few points that you might want to look up for further study. And now you know more of the story. Stay tuned. This is John McCamick with Truth University. Good day.